Okay, then let's.
You're on.
Is it on?
You're on. Yeah, the light is on.
Yep. Which is the light there? Okay. So good morning. I'm John Eibner, the president of Christian Solidarity International. And it's an honor for us to host this side event at the 56th session of the UN Human Rights Council. The subject of our deliberation today is human rights in Azerbaijan, the human rights keys to sustainable peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It's a great honor for CSI to host a distinguished panel of human rights defenders to lead our discussion today. They have been commissioned to address this theme by the representatives of the forcibly displaced Armenian community in the former Nagorno Karabakh autonomous oblast, known historically in Armenia as Artsakh. This event has particular relevance. It comes as 3 decades of Armenian-Azerbaijani peace negotiations enter a new, promising but dangerous phase. I would like to start the introductions with the gentleman who leads the panel, Vartan Oskanian. For 10 years, he served as the foreign minister of the Republic of Armenia, served between 1998 and 2008. And as such, he was engaged deeply with the international community, including Azerbaijan, in the search for peace. Sitting next to Mr. Oskanian is Armine Aleksanyan. She was born and raised in Nagorno Karabakh. She rose through the ranks of a largely male-dominated community leadership to become deputy foreign minister in 2015 of the disputed and unrecognized Republic of Nagorno Karabakh. As such, she similarly is engaged with representatives of the international community in the search for peace. And lastly, there's Armine Aleksanyan, a distinguished lawyer heading the law firm Aleksanyan and Dajani, based in Chicago. He is very well known as a defender of human rights, bringing cases to the International Court of Human Justice. He has been in the forefront of the defense of the legal rights of the Armenians of Nagorno Karabakh, or Artsakh as they call it, and the Armenian Quarter of Jerusalem. And these cases have been brought before the International Court of Justice. Finally, I would like to introduce my distinguished colleague, Dr. Joel Veldkamp from Christian Solidarity International, who will moderate today's discussion. To you, Joel.
Thank you, Dr. Eibner, and welcome everyone to this very important and very timely panel. Just a few housekeeping notes. Our colleague from CSI, Mr. Simon Brechbuhl, will be taking some photos of the panel. Aside from him, participants in this panel are not allowed to take photos or videos. These are the rules that we've been asked to abide by the UN. The format of today's side event will take the form mostly of a panel discussion. We will begin with some opening remarks from Mr. Vartan Oskanian, the former foreign minister of Armenia. After that, we will segue to a panel discussion with our panelists, which I will moderate. The final 10 minutes of this side event will be dedicated to Q&A from all of you. We want to hear your questions, your thoughts. Please do make your questions, not statements. And please keep them to 1 minute. I will be keeping time. Thank you very much. Baron Oskanian, please.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Joel. I'll try to speak 10 minutes. First, let me thank you for this opportunity. Well, the reason we're here today, having these meetings at the UN with different agencies and also representatives of different countries, is to plead for 2 things. Justice for the people of Nagorno Karabakh and durable and lasting peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The key word here I want to emphasize is durable peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. These two goals are inextricably interconnected. Let me start with justice and say a few things about the people of Nagorno Karabakh and the territory they inhabit. The right of Nagorno Karabakh people to live in peace and dignity in their historic homeland is compelling, given the exculpatory conditions surrounding Nagorno Karabakh case. Nagorno Karabakh has never ever been part of independent Azerbaijan and has maintained a coherent identity as a people with an attachment to the land of Nagorno Karabakh for centuries. During the period of 1918-1920 of the past century, during the republics of Armenia and Azerbaijan, it was a disputed territory. During the Soviet times, Nagorno Karabakh held the status of Nagorno Karabakh autonomous region and maintained an effective democratic and legitimate government over the territory for the 30 years since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Well, during these 30 years, there were peace negotiations between Armenians and Azerbaijanis under the auspices of the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairmanship, the US, France, and Russia, and sought a peaceful settlement to the conflict. Notably, these negotiations were grounded in the principle of non-use of force, territorial integrity of states, and self-determination of peoples. Look, I've been at the forefront, as was mentioned, of these talks from the early 90s to the end of my tenure as foreign minister in 2008. I know every nook and cranny of the negotiations. The OSCE Minsk Group set forth the basic elements for a just and fair settlement of the conflict. One, return of territory surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijani control. An interim status for Nagorno-Karabakh, providing guarantees for security and self-governance. A corridor linking Armenia to Nagorno-Karabakh. Future determination of the final legal status of Nagorno-Karabakh through a legally binding expression of will. The right of all internally displaced persons and refugees to return to their former places of residence. And finally, international security guarantees that will include a peacekeeping operation. But unfortunately, on September 27, 2020, while these principles still held, Azerbaijan launched a surprise military attack, thereby violating the fundamental principle of non-use of force. In the course of 2023, Nagorno-Karabakh was subjected to severe blockade, violence, destruction of humanitarian aid, and military aggression by Azerbaijan, this time in violation of November 9, 2020 ceasefire agreement. On September 19, 2023, after enduring nearly 10 months of a blockade that caused mass starvation, deprivation, illness, and death, and now faced with imminent destruction, the entire Armenian population fled the homeland amidst patent threats of ethnic cleansing and genocide. In fact, in a report released in August 2023, Luis Moreno Ocampo, the founding prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, accused Azerbaijan of committing genocide by intentionally subjecting the group to conditions aimed at its physical destruction. Only recently, the Freedom House put out a report on the issue. The gathered evidence, they said, demonstrates that the Azerbaijani state acted upon a comprehensive, methodically implemented a strategy to empty Nagorno-Karabakh of its ethnic Armenian population and historical and cultural presence. Well, today Azerbaijan stands defiant, denying the people of Nagorno-Karabakh their fundamental rights. Azerbaijan illegally holds Armenian prisoners of war, while all Azerbaijani prisoners of war have been returned. It holds innocent civilians and most notoriously a large group of current and former political leaders of Nagorno-Karabakh, with whom the Azeri leadership and the representatives of the international community, principally the Minsk Group co-chairs, have been engaged for decades in peace talks. Azerbaijan persistently and with impunity expropriates Nagorno-Karabakh people's properties, desecrates, destroys, and eliminates centuries-old Armenian cultural heritage. And on top of all this, Azerbaijan occupies chunks of territories of the Republic of Armenia and threatens further territorial grabs from Armenia. While the current situation in Nagorno-Karabakh III does not favor a safe return, international law protects the right of return of forcibly displaced people to the territory of origin. This right is recognized as a customary norm of international law, human rights law, and international humanitarian law. Actually, there's the International Court of Justice ruling on November 17 of last year required Azerbaijan to facilitate the safe and unhindered return of Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians to their country. On March 12th of this year, the European Parliament passed a resolution urging Azerbaijan to engage in meaningful dialogue with Karabakh Armenians to ensure their rights and security, including the right of return to their homes under international protection. So far, Azerbaijan has not taken any meaningful steps to fulfill those orders. I will urge the UN, maybe in the person of Madam Ashwini, the Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of religious discrimination, to undertake a fact-finding visit to the displaced people of Nagorno-Karabakh and submit a report on ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh to the Human Rights Council. Now, to finish, let me just circle back to where I started and talk about just and durable peace. Despite the challenges, let me say that the people of Nagorno-Karabakh remain resolute in their determination to return to their homeland, determine their political future, and exercise their own democratic self-governance. Thus, repatriation under international protection, such as a transitional UN administration and peacekeeping, is crucial for achieving just and lasting peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. A fragile notion of stability achieved through coercion and force is inherently impermanent. Lasting peace can only be realized through a comprehensive resolution that restores the fundamental rights of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. This principle must be enshrined in any peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as sustainable peace remains elusive when the people of Nagorno-Karabakh remain forcibly displaced from their ancestral land. If we truly would like to achieve a just and durable peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan and the region, two things need to happen. One, Armenia must overcome its fear of war when it defends its legitimate rights, and also defends the legitimate rights of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. And more importantly, Azerbaijan must snap out of its euphoric sentiment still dominant since the end of the 44-day war, and stop viewing and treating the peace talks with Armenia as a continuation of a capitulation process. Ladies and gentlemen, negotiations and how the experience work when both sides enter into them in good faith and the right mindset, even if there is a lack of trust. Today, both sides, but mostly Azerbaijan as well as many in the international community, seem to think that a military loss, and Armenians did indeed suffer a military loss, equals conceding all international norms, human, civil, and political rights, and submitting to any sort of rule proposed by the other side. This is not a workable formula for peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and clearly not a good precedent for the other ongoing peaceful resolutions and conflicts around the globe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Oskanian. For those who are interested, as Dr. Eibner said at the beginning, Minister Oskanian has been chosen by the elected parliament of the Republic of Nagorno Karabakh in exile to head a committee for the defense of the fundamental rights of the people of Nagorno Karabakh. And on our website, which you can find on the handout at the table, we'll be posting some documents from this committee, as well as Mr. Oskanian's statement. I'd like to begin the panel discussion with Ms. Aleksanyan. Ms. Aleksanyan, you were born in Nagorno Karabakh, and your family lived there until the ethnic cleansing operation last September. We often hear the words right of return in human rights documents or in international law contexts. Can you tell us what the right of return means to you and to your family?
Thank you, Joel, for the question. And thanks everyone for making time to be here. First of all, I think when we think about right of return, we have to understand why these people left Nagorno Karabakh in the first place. What were the conditions that made them make the difficult decision in their lives? Because it doesn't happen like when people, hundreds, thousand and more, wake up one day and decide to voluntarily depart their homes, abandon their homes, abandon their lives to which they're used to, and as one, leave their homes. Certain reasons force them to make such a decision when there is no other way. And that was the situation when the Armenians of Karabakh had to left, when they were threatened with the choice to leave or be killed, to be voluntarily killed or to stay voluntarily alive, if we are to use the word volunteer that was used yesterday by Azerbaijani delegation, I should say. So any return of Karabakh Armenians should be in conditions whereby a repetition of a scenario that happened in 2023 is excluded. For that to take place, there needs to be solid international guarantees, solid international mechanisms for implementing that. And first of all, certain guarantees that Azerbaijan will comply with its international obligations, including the International Court of Justice orders, that none of them to this day had been implemented. Because it would be naive to think that these people were agreed to return and be subjected to even more torture and devastation after undergoing a 10 months, more than 10 months blockade, where they were subjected to starvation, where their basic rights, the very basic rights, were violated. The right to life, first of all, the right to food, the right to electricity, the right to, I mean, you name it, no right to stay for the very last moment, unless when the time came and they understood that it was impossible. So for them to be able to return, first of all, it should be a collective return. These people should return back to their former places of residence, to their indigenous homeland, with international guarantees, and where they can exercise their fundamental human rights. And I think this is the right place to actually advocate for the protection of those rights for the people whose voice can hardly be heard nowadays.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aleksanyan. Mr. Kirkonian, from the perspective of international law, how should we qualify or understand what happened in Nagorno Karabakh last September?
I think that's a fantastic question, Joel, because context is really important. If we don't understand the proper context under which the current situation has been formed, we really miss a key element of this. And you don't have to take my word for it. Freedom House's report that Minister Oskanian just referenced a short while ago made an interesting statement. In the Freedom House report, it stated that the government of Azerbaijan acted with an intent to destroy the population of Nagorno Karabakh. That word comes directly from, that phrase comes directly from a very important international convention, and that's the Genocide Convention. The intent to destroy is code for the elimination and eradication of a people. In fact, the very building we're sitting in and the institutions created around the United Nations were created in the aftermath of the Holocaust and created for the purpose of preventing precisely that type of act and precisely that type of impunity. And the reality here is that the factual circumstances are almost comedic in its level of impunity. The history is important to kind of understand here. In the International Court of Justice case, evidence was presented to the court. And in that, the body of evidence was a really telling document, a postage stamp issued by the government of Azerbaijan, a government in this century, depicting an individual in a hazmat suit exterminating Nagorno Karabakh. That was a stamp issued by a government today. Of course, the Universal Postal Service refused to print and circulate that stamp for obvious reasons. The International Court of Justice case spoke about the dehumanization of the Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians by the government. In fact, the language used was at the highest levels of the government. Dehumanization of Armenians. References to Armenians as cancers that need to be cut out, rats, references to Armenians as dogs that need to be chased, and in fact, weaponry labeled, hand-labeled as dog chasers, missiles called dog chasers. And in fact, at the end of the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, when I say the end, the removal of the population, and there was death, although that is not required, as you all well know, for genocide to be committed. It's about the destruction of a civilization. The president of Azerbaijan, it's almost ridiculous to even say this, stood in the middle of Stepanakert, the capital of Nagorno-Karabakh, lit a bonfire, a campfire, and stated on his social media and circulating to the world that he was now even cleansing the aura of the Artsakh Armenians. Think about that for a second. So we can't analyze the situation without appreciating the fact that there is an intent to destroy. An intent to destroy a population. This is not simply about territory. This is not simply about religion. It's not even simply about ethnicity. This is about a plan to destroy a civilization, a 4,000-year-old civilization. And if you think that the removal of the human beings was enough, it wasn't. Today, Azerbaijan tries to remove Armenian letters from churches. It takes steeples down, destroys churches completely, unearths cemeteries. It's not even sufficient that the land holds Armenian bones. That's not enough. They need to get rid of that too. Now, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. This is what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with an ongoing intent to destroy the very presence and memory of the Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians, and analyzing it with through any other prism doesn't do the issue justice. It is not a normal circumstance when you are dealing with the intent to destroy people. It's not about negotiation. Unless the context is set and you are looking at it through the prism of one of the most violent and methodical crimes that the international system knows, the destruction of a people, you're not going to achieve peace because the impunity is an obstacle to resolution. And so I think that when we look at the Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh people's right to return, it must rest on three crucial pillars. The first is that it has to be collective because there's safety in numbers. The second, as Ms. Aleksanyan says, is it has to be under international protection. And this should not be a surprise. You would never take a subjected victim population and put them into the clutches of a military and political leadership that is intent on destroying them. That doesn't make any sense. And then the third is we would return the people with their fundamental rights as human beings. That includes the right to life, and it includes the right to self-determination. You cannot convince a people to return to a land and say, you are going to return, but you're not going to talk about your right to self-determination. That's like saying you can return, but we're not going to talk about your right to life. You're returning them subhuman. And that's not something we as an international organization, as an international community should tolerate. And there are, and I just close with this, Joel, there are an infinite number of atrocities and an infinite number of difficulties throughout the world. There's no question about that. This is one of many, and we understand that. But if the international community can't handle one this small, this blatant, this obvious, and with this much impunity, you don't have to go search for the evidence. All you have to do is go to Azerbaijan's website. You can find the impunity right there. That's what happened in the International Court of Justice. This was the evidence presented by the government of Azerbaijan itself. If we can't fix it in this situation, we stand no chance at fixing it anywhere else. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Mr. Krikonian. Mr. Oskanian, Mr. Krikonian just talked about the legal aspects of the right of return. It can't just be a simple physical return. There has to be return with rights, return as a collective. But from your perspective as a diplomat, what would this actually look like to implement if we were, as an international community, to implement this right for the Armenians of Nagorno Karabakh?
Well, the legal aspects, Joel, are of course important. That undergirds the political processes, gives you foundation to argue your case. But at the end of the day, which has always been the case from the start of this conflict, early 90s, we all understood, despite the fact that our case was very strong in any court, that this is a political process. We need to reach a political solution and not a legal one. The legal could substantiate, could undergird and helps the process, but eventually it's got to be a political decision. That's why it's not only for that reason, but the sake of true peace in our region, after all this suffering that we've gone through, we want to just put a final end to this conflict. Our argument is that after all this happened, let's do this process right, the peace process right. Let's not bring this to fruition under coercion and threat of war. Let's put that aside. As I said in the concluding remark, towards the end, that Azerbaijan has to snap out of its euphoric sentiment and start looking at this as a two-way process, not as a continuation of a capitulation process. That's what they're doing it now. And this, I believe, will not bring a durable peace. Look, there would be all sorts of solutions to this. The conditions that Garnik said, Armine talked about it, may leave the impression to the outsiders that, oh, well, you know, these all make sense, but makes it even more complicated. I mean, why would Azerbaijan accept all this? Yes, I'll, accept that, sentiment. But again, if you try to put all this in the context of durable peace, then you start looking at it differently. Look, the people of Nagorno Karabakh were not parachuted in on that territory from another planet last week, last month, last year, even 10, 20 years ago. These people have been there for centuries. I always say in that whole Armenian plateau, wherever Armenians there around that region, the most Armenian territory is the territory of Nagorno Karabakh. Throughout centuries of history, when Armenia has become subjugated to different, powers, from the Romans to the Byzantines to the Arabs to the Turks, what have you, Nagorno Karabakh was the only Armenian territory that maintained, if not its full independence, at least its quasi-independence, because of its mountainous region and what have you. And the most Armenian territory in that whole place now is simply been given to Azerbaijan, and they claim that it's been theirs. It's never been theirs and won't be theirs. I mean, that's the answer. So this is the right context that we need to look at these things, because if this issue lingers around, the current government may sign agreement, eventually they will go, others will come, generations will be thought about their history, about Karabakh, and this issue will pop up again sometime down the road. So our argument is, let's do it right. Let's face the issues, up front and try to provide a solution. And I think there are. Look, there are many right of return cases around the globe. Some of them are still funding from Palestinians to Cyprus, Rohingyas. You have the South Sudanese. There are several cases in Africa. Some have already been resolved with successful outcomes in Africa mostly. But Karabakh's case, compared to those even, is so unique because of the historical factor and the land attachment, the territorial attachment that these people have. This is very similar, close to the Palestinian case, where it's disputable that the Palestinians are still in refugee camps in Lebanon. They have their roots somewhere else. They need to return back home one day. And this is going to be something very close to the Palestinian case, because their roots are there. No matter Azerbaijan tries hard to eliminate, it won't succeed. And eventually, this issue will come up again. So if we're going to talk peace, let's talk about the durable peace. And one of the conditions to achieve a durable peace, to address this issue, and let's have the people of Nagorno Karabakh return to their homes and talk with the Azeris, as they started at one point, and reach an agreement that will satisfy the expectations and the needs of both sides.
Sure, Oskanian. Ms. Aleksanyan, Azerbaijan is confirmed to be holding 23 Armenians hostage in Baku, and there are 100 other Armenians who were last seen in Azerbaijani captivity, but they're unaccounted for. And some of these men are men that you knew and worked with as a member of the Nagorno Karabakh Foreign Ministry. What can you tell us about the conditions that these men might be held in right now? What would you say about these cases?
Thank you, Joel, for the question. Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where a question like that actually comes out, because had we been dealing with a normal state whereby prisons, there would be no doubt about anything. But from the experience that we had, and I was a member of the Nagorno-Karabakh State Commission on dealing with the issues of POWs, hostages, and missing people, the fate of which is yet unknown, we know things that could happen. Unfortunately, I have no way of attesting to what exactly these people are going through. I can only imagine to what through they can go, because unfortunately with a state like Azerbaijan, there's no way of checking that. We have no access or contact with my colleagues, the leaders, to be able to state for sure what's happening. But one thing is sure, that from the experience as a member of that commission, one can, I mean, maybe in Europe you cannot imagine, but someone who has gone through 4 wars and all the problems of mutilation and, I mean, the most horrible things that can happen to any human being in a country where Armenophobia is at the very highest level, and that's why it is in SCJ on the third, can happen to that people. I mean, I don't even want to think, to imagine as a human being what it could be. And that's why it is very important that international structures step in, and whether it's pressurizing Azerbaijan, because those people should be in freedom, because trilateral statement that was signed between the leaders of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia had a provision in that all the hostages and POWs should be exchanged. Armenia, on its part, has completed this obligation. Azerbaijan is still holding to it, not only holding to it, but actually fabricating charges against them. And we don't know where it will lead us. And unfortunately, we're not in a position they're not in a position to even defend themselves in a free trial, which is a basic human right as well, the entitlement to free trial. So in that sense, I think this is the right place to actually call on international lawyers, international human rights organizations to make everything possible in their force to advocate for these people to be released immediately. That's as much as I can tell, unfortunately.
Well, Joe, the only guilt of these people was that they were negotiating, the fate of their people, their political status, and they were fighting, I put fighting in quotation, for their freedom and for Karabakh people's self-determination. That's the only guilt that these people can't be charged of. And Garnig is an international lawyer. Let me tell you if there's any provision, any point in any international law that will, sustain such a charge. Everything else that Azeris have charged these people, they're all pent-up, fabricated from terrorism to what have you. And that's, I agree with 100% with Armine, that all human rights organizations should put this on their agenda and try to get these people to be released before Olympics, maybe, but necessarily before the COP, the environmental, the conference that this year will be held of all places in Azerbaijan, which is one of the most polluters in the world. Oil gas producer holding COP, one can imagine how they got that privilege, but at least this is a good opportunity, I think, for all those countries who support democracy and human rights, put pressure on Azerbaijan until the start of COP, that the political prisoners be released from the Azerbaijani prison.
Yeah, now I have it. Thank you both very much. Mr. Kekornian, also to you on the prisoners question. One of the hostages being held by Azerbaijan is Mr. Ruben Vartan, who was the Minister of State for Nagorno Karabakh during Azerbaijan's 9-month siege of the territory. And his lawyers just submitted an appeal to Dr. Alice Edwards, the Special Rapporteur for Torture at the UN, alleging that he's been held in forced positions, that he's been deliberately deprived of sleep, that he's been denied his dignity in various ways. Do these claims fit with what we know about conditions in prisons in Azerbaijan? And
yeah, thank you for the question, Joel. I think fit within is probably an understatement. I'm going to give an example, and I apologize for the graphic nature of this, but I think it's important to understand exactly what we're dealing with. An Armenian woman was captured by the Azerbaijani military. Her eyes were literally gouged out. Stones were put inside her eye sockets. Her fingers were chopped off and stuffed into her mouth. Now, she's a mother, not much older than many of the women here today. Azerbaijan is a rogue state with energy resources. That's the difference. It's a rogue state with energy resources. And because of that, it gets to play. It gets to play with formalities and niceties of trials. And, as an international lawyer, we try to get to the substance of the issues, not the formality. So the description of torture that Ruben Vartan and other democratically elected political officials of the government of Nagorno Karabakh are experiencing, I think it's a gentle, whitewashed way to say what is actually happening to these people. And that's because, and I come back to a point I mentioned earlier, because the actual dirty laundry has not been exposed and dealt with. You cannot have impunity. You cannot have the intent to destroy and pretend that everything is working as normal. The intent to destroy changes everything, from the treatment of the POWs to the negotiations of the peace process to what it means to have a durable peace. Durable means sustainable. You cannot have a sustainable peace in the South Caucasus until you deal with the mental state that is driving one of the main actors. That's like saying that, in 1948 we should move a population of Jews into Nazi Germany. It would make no sense. It's disgusting to even talk about. It's illegal to talk about. Yet here, we're inviting peace talks and peace processes without resolving the underlying problem. There are third graders in Azerbaijan today that learn about Armenians as dirty people, as sly people, third graders. That's 8 years old. Unless you remedy the underlying problem, you will not have peace. The plight of the Nagorno Karabakh Armenians is a case in point. People don't get up and leave a 4,000-year-old civilization. They're pushed to the point where the choice is death or displacement. And every mother on earth will choose displacement over the death of her child. And mind you, that choice of displacement was made after over 9 months of blockade. And if you don't think countries around the world watched what Azerbaijan did and learned, the examples are all around what's happening now. We don't take care of the problem. We not only cause extreme suffering and indignity, but then we allow them to repeat it. We allow states to transfer the thinking, the ideology to other places. And we see the suffering again and again and again. Again, a rogue state with energy resources. The fact that it has energy resources should not matter to the people gathered in this hall and in these buildings. It's disgusting to talk about the facts. But if we're not talking about the facts, what are we doing?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kirkonian. It is difficult to hear these stories, but very important. And we are at the Human Rights Council, so important to face the truth. Minister Oskanian, you spoke earlier about how Nagorno Karabakh has maybe the most rich history of Armenian heritage in the region. And we know that it's home to hundreds of ancient and medieval churches and monasteries, cross stones. 2 questions. What can we expect for this heritage now that it's come under Azerbaijani control? And what might a cooperative approach to protecting this heritage do for the peace process?
I think this is the easiest part for the international community to address, Joel. It's something that everybody will jump on it. I think UNESCO should take charge, send a fact-finding mission, and have presence, on the ground, just to, list all the monuments, put a check on them and continuously revisit to guarantee their, preservation. But again, this can only be done if there is a, goodwill from the other side, if they're in this with the right mindset. But everything Garnik said, which I agree, and part of the same thing that I said, and this is our conviction, it's not only ours in our committee, but the overwhelming majority of the Armenian people and 100% of the people in Nagorno-Karabakh who witnessed and felt this on their skin. That makes us to be extremely suspicious that even on the cultural matters, Azerbaijan will be willing to allow visits, because they have the precedents. Their other exclave, Nakhchivan, which was also a disputed territory at the turn of the century, 1918-20. As a disputed territory, Stalin put Nakhchivan under Azerbaijani control, totally, as an autonomous republic, decided to put Nagorno-Karabakh as an autonomous region within Azerbaijan. So that was Stalin's decision as part of his divide and rule policy. Stalin gone a long time ago, then the Soviet Union collapsed, justice was attempted to re-establish, Azeris did not tolerate, employed the military, force, and the rest of course, is history. So there's the Nakhchivan example. Nakhchivan was dotted with thousands of Armenian monuments, And during my tenure, I remember every UNESCO meeting speech would call on them, the atrocities that were being committed. There were still some remnants during my tenure, and we see in front of our eyes satellite pictures that have they're being simply eliminated, diminished. As the Karabakh issue was flaring up, they just wanted to finish with Nakhichevan altogether. So that doesn't come up one day if Armenians remain prevalent in the Nagorno Karabakh case. So there's a clear intent not only to destroy entire population, but with it, its traces, its culture, and what have you. So anyway, I'm not hopeful that Azeris will comply with any international norms when it comes to monuments, cultural heritage. But again, this is at least the most non-political item that the international community can freely pursue. They can talk about it. No one will tell them, you're politicizing the issue, you're taking side, or what have you. And also, this clearly falls also within your preview, guys, the Christian Solidarity International, where you globally protect Christian monuments, the Christianity in general, from persecution or what have you. So we have a pretty good case here, both at the state level and NGO level, to at least stop the destruction of the Armenian monuments in Nagorno-Karabakh and around.
Yeah, thank you, Minister Oskanian. As you say, this is an issue of the common heritage of humanity. It's a religious freedom issue. These are often religious monuments that belong to the Armenian people. And it is an issue of Christian heritage for those of us who share that faith. Ms. Aleksanyan, perhaps the last question for you. If friendly states want to help the Armenians of Nagorno Karabakh realize their right of return and build a sustainable peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, what would you say to them? What would you say to the missions in this room on that subject?
That's indeed a really good question, considering I think the first thing that friendly states and everyone who wants to contribute to peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan and help the fate of Nagorno-Karabakh people should be, first of all, accountability. To hold accountable those who perpetuated what they have done to the people of Karabakh. And not only for the sake of Nagorno-Karabakh people, because accountability is the key to preventing future crimes from happening, because impunity and the silence and indifference of the surroundings of friends, non-friends, leads to new crimes. We have seen this before. When you don't protest about injustice that is happening in front of your eyes, in the 21st century, whereby we have all the technical and other means of raising our voice about this, putting on the agenda of international organizations, more so of the international human rights organizations, that's when Azerbaijan takes this as a message of a green light to go further on attacking the sovereign Armenian territory, to go further on calling the current day Armenian sovereign state, Western Azerbaijan. The appetite is gross. And if nothing is done, if it doesn't feel responsible, or if it doesn't feel that it will be held accountable for what it has gone away with, because all of these crimes have been digested, unfortunately, by the international community. And some people may think, okay, a million people die in different parts of the world. It's not about numbers. It's about human dignity and human rights. It's about people and their fate. More than 150,000 people, because we forget about the 30,000 that voluntarily couldn't return back because their homes were already occupied and already by now are already settled by new owners, new Azeri owners of their homes. So the key here is to use all the toolbox of international organizations such as UN, all the instruments that humanity has to prevent or to punish, whether this will happen by diplomatic means, whether it will be sanctions. We have seen the sanctions scheme working quite well in other conflicts. We don't have to go far. We can see the sanctions regimes imposed by many, by the states, by the European Union in case of Ukraine. How is the Nagorno-Karabakh case different? What is the difference there that we cannot actually impose sanction in this case, which will stop Azerbaijan dreaming that the world is a place whereby if you have the power and the ability to destroy, you will get away with it. And it's okay to kill people. It's okay to displace them and call it a volunteer departure. It should not be okay. Because if this is okay, there will be another crime in another corner of the world. And I think humanity won't be able to sleep, if you want, peacefully, if it allows things like this continue to happen. We have to stop this anywhere that it happens. And I think this is the right moment to put this on the agenda and prevent it from happening. Also, every day, every single day, we see a new video of the Nagorno-Karabakh cultural and historical heritage being destroyed. Churches dating back to the 4th, 6th, 12th century are being erased from the earth. This is not only the cultural heritage of the Armenian people, this is the heritage of humanity, and we're all equally responsible for the protection of this. So I would call on friendly states to actually keep high all these issues on the agenda, because this is the place for human rights, for gods of human rights. And the right to worship actually is one of those basic rights of which the Artsakh Armenians are deprived of these days. So I really accountability and keep fighting the fights needed to bring justice and establishing just peace, not enforced peace, but a just peace that can be sustainable for the benefit of all the people in the region, not just for the Armenian people.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aleksanyan. Thank you to our panelists. We're now going to have 10 minutes for questions. Is there anyone who has a question? Please raise your hand and we'll recognize you. Yes, sir, please.
Thank you very much to the speakers. I'm very grateful to have you here and to hear your inputs. I'm Peter Pro from the World Council of Churches. With regard to the hostages and prisoners of war still held by Azerbaijan, we had some earlier consultations with the ICRC about their efforts such as they were, to establish the whereabouts and the condition of these prisoners. I imagine that you have had similar consultations, and I wonder if you have any further information, any sense of the status of the ICRC efforts and their prospects of success. Secondly, with regard to the protection of religious and cultural heritage in Nagorno Karabakh, and elsewhere for that matter, we've been advocating for a UNESCO fact-finding mission since immediately after the 2020 conflict, and we have been repeatedly informed about consultations and political dialogue for that purpose with no demonstrable effect. Obviously, there is a blockage, and obviously Azerbaijan does not agree, but I'm wondering, what is your sense of the nature of the blockage, the political forces that are sustaining it, and what would be necessary for the international community to break that blockage and belatedly allow for a UNESCO fact-finding mission to take place? Thank you.
Regarding the ICRC, rightly noticed, ICRC was the only international organization, international presence in Nagorno-Karabakh during the long blockade months, and the organization that tried to ease the suffering of the people sieged in their own homes, in their own country. But unfortunately, ICRC, by the nature of its neutrality, cannot share information to public. They make visits, monthly visits to the detainees in Azeri prisons, and they pass the information between the families of the detained. But they have no right. They cannot publicize for many obvious reasons, because otherwise they lose credibility to do it the next time. So in that sense, we're in a situation whereby we cannot really, because no other lawyers are allowed in, we cannot really say what exactly. We know that they're alive. That's all that we know we can state, at least to this point. In what conditions, we can read from the press briefings that Ruben Vartanyan's lawyers have published about the conditions he was kept in prison. But other than that, I'm afraid we don't have access to any information, any credible information as to what the situation is with them.
Just quickly, the second on about this.
Yeah, with respect to the attempt by UNESCO to gain access, it's not a surprise that there are significant obstacles created by Azerbaijan. I could tell you the purpose and a suggestion as to what might work. The purpose is to buy time, because destroying places takes time. And I'm going to give a perfect example of this. Minister Oskanian referred to the situation in Nakhichevan. Azerbaijan denied any cultural destruction repeatedly in Nakhichevan until satellite images and photographs were revealed that showed exactly the destruction that was taking place. Entire cemeteries excavated with caterpillars and other types of equipment. So I think it's clear that there's a buying time aspect of this. The president of Azerbaijan himself was sent pictures circulating where he's scratching off lettering off an Armenian church saying that these churches are not Armenian, that this is fake. And there's been a narrative that these churches are actually not Armenian, but they're Albanian churches, surprisingly. That was quite the announcement, but it allows for the building of narratives. So that's why it's happening. How to overcome it? States don't react to beseeching. They react to consequences. There need to be consequences for not playing within the system of rules that is established by states for states. As Ms. Aleksanyan mentioned, cultural heritage, religious heritage, this belongs to the global world. Armenia, is no surprise, is the first state to accept Christianity as a state religion. Those churches mean something to Christianity. There need to be consequences. When there are consequences, and I would implore UNESCO and other international organizations to impose consequences on state behavior that is contrary to the very principles of the treaties that create these organizations. You can't play and then not play when you don't want to do things that require you that you're required to do under the laws. You don't get to choose. That's the beauty of law as opposed to politics. With law, there are rules. Play within the rules, and you move forward.
One more question from the floor, organizers. Could we ask for that? Is there anyone else who has a very quick question for the panel? Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation, and I empathize deeply with Ms. Aleksanyan's accounting of her home. I was just wondering if you could maybe speak a little to the sort of wider geopolitical setting at play here. Obviously, Azerbaijan is not a democracy, and the leadership in Azerbaijan is not acting in a democratic way. So I think it's maybe also important to address that there's obviously external actors playing here to take advantage of the fact that Azerbaijan is not a democracy and that Aliyev is not a democratic leader to further hurt the people of Karabakh Artsakh. And yeah, I was wondering how you could speak to that. Thank you.
Very quickly.
Well, that would require a very long answer, but I will be very short. Indeed, geopolitics plays a major role now in our region. This whole Ukraine-Russia war and the rest of the adversarial situation between East and West, China, the Gaza. I mean, the political environment, the global, is so complicated that it's certainly having an impact on our region. Look, Russia has a presence in Armenia. They have a military base. That, in this context, clearly an element that is being used and abused. The West interest comes not only from Azerbaijani oil, but also getting Russia out of the region. So that's another factor. There's the issue of the corridor that goes through Armenia, linking Central Asia through Caucasus to Europe via Turkey. That's another element. So these all have piled up now, topping the existing problems that we're trying to deal with, the right of return, and the violations that Azerbaijan is engaged in, and what have you. So indeed, it's a very complicated knot that we're dealing with, and it's not easy just to cut it. The question does not have an easy answer. It simply requires a very, good diplomacy. We need to act wisely, intelligently, and also just be guided by our national interests. That's what I always pursue, because if you start looking at things from above, from outside, and start looking at your own narrow problem from the interest of the others, start thinking what the US wants, the West wants, Russia wants, China wants, India wants in our region, then you get so complicated, the complicated matter that will be extremely difficult to come out of it. Look at your own narrow issue. What needs to resolve this? What we need to do to achieve a durable peace with Azerbaijan? Then start adding up on the other elements, see which other interests may interfere with this, what could impede our own intentions. So our focus must remain, despite all the political processes going on around us, just to ignore them. Let that noise, out and focus on your own issue and try to deal with it. I hope the international community also will be able, especially major players, yes, they have their own interests, but let them also first be concerned also about the interest of the two conflicting parties, which is at this moment Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Apologies for going over a few minutes. Thank you very much.